Hi and welcome to the Catching Up Podcast, your show about speedrunnings and the runners themselves. I am Sen Knight, your host, and today we have the chance to have Yagamoth with us, a speedrunner all about challenge runs and pushing the limits of what he can achieve. Join me as we discover more about the man behind the speed. Hi and welcome to the Catching Up Podcast. This is going to be episode 1. I am your host, Sen Knight, and with me today I have Yagamoth. Thank you for answering the call.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate that.
This podcast, we will, like I said before, talk about who the speedrunners are. I want to know a lot of things about who you are, how you handle speedrunning, but I want to know a little bit more on the personal side too, and I know the viewers will. So let's dive right into this. From what I've gathered and from what you've told me in the pre-interview, you're 31.
Indeed, yes.
You're from Switzerland, and you've studied to become an IT engineer, which you actually did for a while, right?
Yes, I worked as an IT engineer for, let's say, 3 or 4 years until it eventually just kind of, I had to do civil service, and after that it took over that streaming is probably a bit more interesting than that job that I did before.
So you civil service, you talk about the army, right?
Basically in Switzerland, it's like you can either do civil service in the army, or you can say, I would like not to go into the army, but then you have civil service as a volunteer for various usually, what's the word? Companies that are not aiming for profit.
Okay, yeah, non-profit organization.
And yeah, pretty much. So I went to a more nature-oriented firm that also needed some IT technicians.
Oh, that's cool. Can I ask you what you did IT work, but what kind of company it was?
It's basically called Naturfreunde.
Yeah.
Translated, that's nature of friends, nature friends.
Yeah,
Whatever.
yeah.
And what I did there was, for the most part, a little bit of everything, to say the least. Originally, I was supposed to just kind of administer the website, but it turns out with the qualifications I had, I was a bit too tall of an order, and I eventually just went over to doing more on the business side, a bit of office jobs, the usual stuff that you can give to people that are not necessarily well versed in that kind of métier.
Oh, that's really interesting. And so I guess your hours get recorded, and there's governmental agencies that tracks how that you did your part, or the company you were working for just signed some kind of paper to tell you if did your duty, your service.
Yes, indeed.
Oh, that's actually interesting. We don't have that here in Canada, so I know there's a lot of country where you have to do military, like at least infantry training or something like this. But in Switzerland, you have the choice.
Yes, you basically go to a day where they kind of examine you, whether you are physically fit enough in order to fit in, whether you have any mental or physical disabilities that would prevent you from doing so. And if you are perfectly fine, you nowadays at least have the choice to go either into the military, which, by the way, just as I was drafted, basically, that kind of changed that I had pretty much a choice whether I wanted to or not. Before, it was mandatory to do military if you were fit enough.
Okay, and just before you entered, they were giving you the choice.
Yes, pretty much, as in, it was rather straightforward.
Would you have been interested in the military thing, or it was clearly the only avenue you had to do something more like working for a company?
Honestly, I really did not want to do the military thing. Like, one concern is that because of my office job, I was just physically not particularly fit enough anyways. So
Yeah.
I felt like I would be more fitting to do some, work for other types of companies. Also gives you interesting insight into various other things.
Was that a fun experience? Would you remember that as being a cool thing you did, or
Let's put it this way. Overall, it was kind of a positive experience, I would say. But interesting enough, I think about an entire year over at that nature company, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But I had, at the very beginning, 1 month at a hospital where I just helped out with storage and also delivering certain supplies to various wings of the little hospital, to say the least.
Yep.
And that was actually a much more interesting experience to me, even though it was so short. But it definitely can form you one way or another. And I feel like thanks to that little storage experience, I now have a bit more of an idea as to how to properly do stuff, as in organize in terms of, well, storage, really.
Yeah, cool. That can be useful in all kind of ways.
Indeed.
All right. So you've worked for 2 years, you said, for the nature company?
Actually, one.
Okay, 1 year, yeah. That's the time of service you have to give your country.
I think it's a bit more than 1 year. I don't know exactly how many days it is anymore. But
Okay.
as I said, it was just kind of split up. I did 1 month at the very beginning because I had to. And then
Yeah.
eventually, when I got older, I was, let's say, more or less forced to do the remainder of my service. And I just could do it all in one go at that other company.
Oh, yeah, okay,
If you,
cool.
if you choose to, you can split it up into multiple things. You can go to various other companies. You have to do at least one block of 6 months where you are in a more specialized area of your expertise, though. And that's kind of what that was for me.
That's awesome. So we were talking about games during the pre-interview. We were talking about the games you played when you were a child, and as you said, when during the NES era, where you've been born and during that age, there was not a lot of games in German, translated in German. So you were still playing the games, but you couldn't play more story-focused game at that time.
Yes, indeed. To be fair, on the NES, there was not all that many story-focused
Yeah,
games.
true.
To me, it was actually a lot like the comics we have over here. As a little kid, I rarely actually read the comics. Like, I just looked at the pictures and I formed the story of, well, those comics in my head anyways. I roughly understood to the extent, and that was kind of fun anyways, even if I couldn't necessarily read.
Yeah, sure. Like you said, the NES era of game were pretty much lackluster in story anyway. So unless there was a clear notification on where you had to go, it could be more complicated. But did you have some kind of an equivalent of Nintendo Power or Genesis?
Yes,
So
actually. We did have Club Nintendo over here. That was a German magazine, and that was one of my favorite things about it, really, because we kind of got news in this little village, backwater village, as I would like to say, about games, and there were really not all that many places to get games, so we kind of had to somehow get informed about what is useful, what is worthwhile. Thankfully, my parents were also quite interested in playing themselves,
Oh.
so they were reasonably well informed too, so that's nice.
Yeah, that's really cool. Actually, we've got a Nintendo because my father wanted to play. He was not a big gamer, and never did he become one. But when I was, I think, 1 or 2 years old, we there was a Nintendo introduced in our home, and I cannot remember because I was so young. But he did told me that I was already big into that space where I was already playing every kind of game I could get my hands on, even though I probably wasn't really good. But yeah, so we did have a Nintendo pretty soon in my life, but sadly we didn't have an equivalent of Nintendo Power, or if we did, I don't think they were delivering in my part of Canada. So it was really hard to get information. I remember we had some kind of a TV hebdo, it was called, like where the TV series or shows would be aired on and the hours and everything. I don't know if you had something similar to this. It was like a little book, and you'd see like if you like X or Y show, it would tell you on which hour it would be aired on.
Yes, we did have those kinds of little booklets as well.
Yeah, and at the end of it, from the one we received on the island I was born, there was this little rubric or this little part of it where somebody was talking about video games. It was probably like 200 words, so it was really small. But the only information I got about video game world was from that. So, and I remember clearly seeing the introduction into the world for Chrono Trigger in one of those little booklets.
Oh, I see.
That was really cool.
Nice.
So you've been introduced to the Nintendo game. Then SNES came in, and there was a lot more games translated for all Europe, which would include Germany, as you told me.
Yes. That is accurate. So
And-
for the most part, there were still some games that were for the Super Nintendo not necessarily translated, but almost all of them in the PAL region had German translations. Some of the games actually even had options for you to choose which language, which is French, German, Italian, Dutch sometimes, and various others.
Yeah, I remember playing a few PAL games through emulation, and I remember this little logo screen before the new game screen, where you would choose the flag of the country you were from to get the language you wanted to play.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, that was also my introduction to French gaming, because I'm mostly speaking French as my mother's tongue. But I did learn English because there was no English game at that time. But as you told me before, you didn't. You actually learned English very late.
Yes, actually reasonably late. So we do start learning English in school at the, let's say, 6th grade. But I was never really big into learning languages because I'd rather have some more logic stuff and math and sports. So I prefer those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But at some point, I just started realizing the area in my expertise, or the profession I wanted to get into, required a lot more English. And at some point, I just started taking at least English a bit more serious, even though my French was still kind of just barely passable.
Yeah.
So yeah, and at some point, the nicest thing was that learning English became significantly easier because I had a really good reason, and that was not school. Because a friend of mine in the apprenticeship, the first year of my apprenticeship for becoming an IT engineer,
Yeah.
he gave me a little CD with anime on it that was in Japanese and English subtitles. So I really liked animes, or just animated cartoons and stuff like that. I didn't realize it was that big of a genre by itself, and
Yeah.
I didn't realize that there was a lot more to it than I had before. So him just giving me an entire CD with 20, 40 episodes at a time was kind of fascinating. And because, well, it was English subtitles, I was kind of forced to learn English, which was really nice. Because,
Or Japanese.
yeah, yes. That would have been a bit more difficult. But
Yeah, I get it.
yeah, you do pick up some Japanese word, but for the most part, I had just a dictionary sitting next to me, pausing the first few episodes every 2 or 3 minutes, or even more frequent than that, in order to look up words. But eventually, just kind of pick up on that really fast. It's pretty awesome, actually.
Yeah, it's kind of impressive. It's just crazy how a passion can make you turn 180 on something you have already decided upon. Like you told me earlier, you're not a really language type of guy. You just at your school you learn 3 language, and you told me actually 4, because there's a Swiss German, which is only talk. You don't write or read Swiss German,
Yeah.
but that still means there's 4 languages you're learning during your school years. So you have a lot of opportunities to see a lot of stuff, and none of them were actually interesting you. You learn Swiss German because that's what you talked, and you learn just German because that's what you were using in school. But other than that, nothing seemed to interest you. And now introduce anime, and Yagamoth is working his ass off to learn a whole new language from scratch and alone. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, it was a worthwhile reason. I wanted to understand what those characters were saying.
Yeah, sure. Because anime could be appreciated like comics, you said when you were younger, you didn't have to
Yes.
understand 100% of what was saying. Most of the stories were lackluster anyway, and you could just enjoy the fights or whatever was happening on screen. But at some point, you get attached to those characters, and yes, you want to know what they were saying. Yeah.
Indeed, yeah.
So, English is introduced in your life through anime and through IT engineering, which is still a big and important part of your life. That's your career choice. That's where you're going. And you end up working as an IT engineer for 3 years, you said.
3 to 4.
Yeah. And I think I'm right on this, but at some point on your life, you end up watching a video from sadly departed John Total Biscuit Bain.
Yes, may you rest in peace.
Yeah, sure.
He was a
And
big inspiration.
he actually also was for me because I've watched a lot of podcasts to get my head around on how I wanted to do mine. And I don't know if you know about the Co-optional podcast, which was
Yes.
not only him, was also Press Hard to Continue and JC Cox. But that was also a big inspiration. Even though I'm doing something different, I still really appreciated the way they were talking, chill. They were taking their times, having fun around the subjects they were talking about.
Indeed. It was actually, at some point, I just regularly watched the co-optional podcast, but at some point, I didn't feel like I had the time to invest anymore to watch all of them. But once in a while, it was really nice to just kind of tune into them.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
so this little video from Total Biscuit is about a game in particular. Do you want to expand on this?
Sure. So at the time, it was the YouTube videos where YouTubers were just kind of reacting and raging at the games just became more and more popular at the time. And he made a bit of a parody video of that in a game that was just newly released called I Wanna Be the Guy Gaiden. Essentially a game that was specifically actually created for a fighting game tournament by Kayan for, let's say, a very specific purpose. Let's leave it at that. It was kind of fun to watch him for a while to struggle. And as I said, he was just deliberately parodying or raging at it. And apparently people really liked that, from what I was told. Either way, I just watched that video and I thought, I can probably do that. Downloaded the game and just kind of play through it. Because I kind of enjoy those kinds of stupid challenges where sometimes the game just kills you because you didn't know there was a fire coming out of the ground right there. Because that's just how this game works.
Yeah, or
But
a
at the
giant
same
fish in a
time-
barrel. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, sorry. At the same time, it's a kind of game where death is not really punishing, which was a rather interesting concept to me at the time, because if you think about dying in a video game, it's a failure state. Like, you failed, you didn't do well. And that's how I feel like most people interpret it when they die in even I Want to Be the Guy Gaiden. Even though, for me, it was just kind of clear from the get-go, death is merely a means to progression. You just gain knowledge and information, and now you need to work your way around that part that kills you. So it's more of a puzzle platformer in my mind.
Yeah, because that is inevitable unless you already know about those kinds of games, because there's more than one. I Want to Be the Guy is a game where you have to die. It's just impossible to beat that blind.
Yes, absolutely.
And like you said, that isn't really punishing because you will do again and again. Yeah, it's kind of frustrating sometimes. You will do again and again parts you've learned, but since you know them now, it's more. You feel great about the fact that the first part, which took you maybe 20 minutes to just understand, now takes you 30 seconds, and you're right back at where you died. And there's checkpoint also, so it's not so bad.
Very frequent checkpoints usually in these kinds of games.
But they're
from
needed.
Checkpoint. Yes, absolutely. From checkpoint to checkpoint, if you know what you're doing, it doesn't take more than 10-15 seconds usually.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the tricky thing. Those 10-15 seconds, once you know what you're doing, are very different for your first time through, as you said, exactly.
Yeah, and that's what's fun. That's how you feel you've progressed. I like now this part I know. How can I beat this next part?
Indeed.
Yeah, and I want to be the guy Gaiden, the first level, which you've mostly worked on. It's based on Bionic Commando from the NES.
Yes.
The first level, actually, but it's kind of, like you said, really trolly and a little bit frustrating. But the fact that you've tackled it like a puzzle game is probably the right way to go into it.
Indeed. I actually had no experience. I didn't even really know much about Bionic Commando in the first place, so it was just like, oh, that kind of looks nice. And then suddenly Donkey Kong at the very end throwing barrels at you. I love that guy.
That's cool.
But
And
yes.
okay, no, go on.
But yes, this, I feel like we can just kind of go into that, I guess. That was my beginning of speedrunning,
Yeah.
since essentially in I Want to Be the Guy Gaiden, there's only 3 levels. And each of those levels, there's a leaderboard which you could actually enter your name to if you just registered. And that was a pretty easy process to register there, so I just did that and saw, under 1 minute, I actually get a top 10 time on the leaderboard. I can easily do that in the first level. So I just did that. Then I saw, about 56 seconds is when the creator of the game, Kei Nazaki, had his best time there. I thought, I can probably beat that too. So I went ahead and just did a bit more trickery, figured out a few things, and eventually beat him without too much trouble as well.
And still today, you're still the top of the leaderboard. Even though it may not be the most active community now, you're still number one for this first level.
Yes, it was actually kind of a weird experience, as in I knew about speedrunning beforehand, and I was just not even really considering whether I could be cut out to be a speedrunner myself, because it was just such an intriguing and interesting concept. Like, I was really interested in the entire community. I was watching the GDQs at the time already. I was interested in many speedruns that were posted on Speed Demo's archive. But it never really crossed my mind at the time that I could do the speedrunning myself. I figured out a few tricks and said, hey guys, there's a forum thread about that game in the Speed Demo's archive thing already. And I figured, oh, people are probably going to put those tricks to use, or maybe I can figure out more things for them. And I just started experimenting, trying to figure out things, and posted them into the forums thread. And only at some point I realized that, well, I could probably just go for the best time myself, I guess.
And that's the most interesting part right now for me. The fact that you didn't even came in with all those tricks, like you've had all the pieces of the puzzle and you actually knew how to put them together. So there was nothing left to do but to put them together. And instead of creating the speed run, putting the pieces together, you've went online and offered the pieces and how to solve the puzzle for free for anybody to take it and create the speedrun. Like, you just gave content. And that's awesome. But that's really strange. And I really appreciate the fact that you were so... Was it some kind of selflessness? Like, just... Or you just didn't thought you were that guy at that time?
Let's put it this way. One thing that, especially at the time, for me, the speedrunning community represented is passion about games. And while my family, pretty much everybody, they like playing video games, they are reasonably decent at it too. I had a neighbor that was pretty good at it too. So it was nice to have those people around. But the type of passion I found in the speedrunning community was what really kind of glued me to it, and I wanted to explore it more. And one of the main ideas about speedrunning for me is that it's not you versus the other people that are running the game as well. It is essentially you as the people running the game versus the game itself.
Yes.
That is the cooperative effort that I just really always appreciated. And I figured, sure, I could be maybe at the top of the leaderboards, keeping the tricks to myself, but that never really crossed my mind that it would be even a thing I would want to do. I always wanted to share what you can do and what you may want to do in those specific levels and instances. So
and that's the kind of attitude which made this this part of the internet what it is today. yes, there's the speedrunners that are trying to fight the leaderboard, and that's quite all right. That's a part of speedrunning too. But the community part of it is the fact that you're not the only person who've done that. I've heard about other runners that are actually speedrun parts or only search for tricks and never get in the spotlight of streaming, or not even make a full run of a game and present it to SDA or speedrun.com or whatever. They just work on a game and give their tricks away. And that's awesome. That's a part of the community.
Yes, it's a very fascinating aspect, and that's for the most part, or actually even nowadays, it's the part I'm most interested in, just kind of figuring out things and then just giving people those pieces and puzzle pieces, as you call them, to use in their runs. For me, it's more interesting to figure out the puzzles and then kind of try to solve it, rather than solve or putting it to use myself in the end. With some exceptions of certain games, but I guess maybe a good example for this, more recently-ish, Wings of Y, or Wings of V, is a really, really difficult platformer, and I really enjoyed my playthrough of that. And since the creator of that game is Solgren, who created I Wanna Be the Boshi, which I also originally speedran, I immediately started figuring out certain things about the game and just kind of certain tricks, certain glitches, and presented those to the people that were actually running it. It's actually a lot of fun, because when I say speedrunning community is really passionate about things and also about games, it's kind of a bit of a contrast to where I was in, let's say, my World of Warcraft days, where let's say you have 25 people. And 3 or 4 of them appreciate when you tell them all those little tricks and all those little things, like when you step 2 feet to the side on the left here, you have actually a bit of a better shot and you can do a bit more damage or heal better, etc. A really small part of the people actually really appreciate all those little tiny optimizations. And that's kind of what I really found in the speedrunning community. People didn't get upset when I kept telling them, hey, I have another little trick for this room over here. You need to jump earlier in order to do the double jump a bit later, and that actually saves you a fifth of a second or something like that. That's the thing I really, really, really liked about it.
Yeah, and it's all about optimization. I was watching a video about Mario Brother 1, the first one on the NES. Do you know the concept of waiting for the bus?
Yes, I absolutely do.
When I've watched a video explaining it, because I've heard the name, the concept before, but I didn't know what it was, and I found a video which explains it. It blew my mind. It saves at best a third of a second, at best, and that's crazy how this game is so optimized that this is the difference between world record or not.
Yes, basically those frame rules are very important in that game. Interestingly enough, I also recently learned in Super Mario Bros. 1, they don't just hit that block where the star appears out of it for fun, they literally use it to manipulate randomness as well for later in the game. I wasn't aware until later. Like, you kind of think, he knows about that star too. You just hit the block and the star pops up. Just keep running because you don't have time to pick it up. Makes sense. But it never crossed my mind until recently that you actually do that in order to manipulate RNG in that game too. It's kind of crazy.
Actually, I didn't know about it before 5 seconds ago. I will look it up later to see actually what it manipulates. It's really interesting.
I think it's for the bullet bill glitch, so the cannon shoots faster at that level.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes.
But if we get back on what we were talking earlier, I gotta agree with you on that matter. I've did dabble a little bit in speedrunning, and I will say dabble, it's important here. But when I did, the part I had the most fun with was, I think it was routing. I did really like the fact that I had to try and find little optimization, and so I get you on that. It was so much fun to just ride that if I go left, it takes 3.2 seconds. If I go right, it's 3.3, and so I need to go left every time, and every testing and trying again and again. It was a lot of fun, actually.
Nice. Yes. And sometimes you get lost within the first 5 minutes of the game for hours and hours on end, and then you realize, wait, there's probably another 2 hours of the game, and I'm still stuck in the first 5 minutes. It's actually kind of fascinating and also very satisfying once you get it right.
Yeah, when you put the pieces of the puzzle together, it's really fun to watch because each of these parts you've practiced so much, but you've practiced it like back to back. You end a part of the level and then you restart it to make sure it sinks in. And when you piece them from front to hand, that's not the same thing. You're actually like, oh, I can do the speed run in one go in one big piece, and it's actually one experience. But muscle memory takes on, and then everything goes okay.
Indeed, with enough practice, muscle memory actually does a pretty crazy amount of work.
Yep, I'm always been impressed with that. And the first time I was introduced to muscle memory to the point that I realized it was with Smash Brothers.
Uh-huh.
I'm a big Smash player, and I'm the overthinking type of player. And even though I'm pretty okay at the game, nothing big, but I think I know the game very well. I've realized that I've performed better when I'm able to turn my brains off.
I see.
When I stop overthinking, like the first minute of the game, it's really important that my brain is on. I will try to read the other player. I will try to mix things up to see how he reacts to mixing a little bit. But after the first half of the match, if I can end up turning my brain off and put muscle memory on, that's crazy, the things that I do. I couldn't even explain to you what went on in my mind. I just knew what I had to do. That's crazy.
Yes, that is when some people call it you're in the zone or you're flowing really well.
Yep.
That's an amazing experience, I do agree.
Yeah, we called it in the zone too, so yeah. That's really cool. So we've talked a little bit about I Want to Be the Guy Gaiden, which was your introduction to speedrunning. But then it went on. You've become a streamer, so like you said, it was a good experience to learn more about what streaming was about, how to take care of your stream, everything. But then you went on other games, right? What was the next in line after I Want to Be the Guy Gaiden? What was next?
The next in line was actually I Want to Be the Boshi.
All right.
So very similar type of game, significantly more difficult, as in genuinely difficult, rather than just the trolley type of difficulty where it's, let's say, fake difficulty.
Yeah.
It does have that too, but it's genuinely really hard. And I just really enjoyed playing through that game casually once. And unfortunately, I went online by just pressing, I think, the F5 button during my play session. And so I didn't get onto the leaderboard. And so I decided, you know what, I'm just going to play through the game again.
All right.
And the second time I also went online by accident because then I finally knew what was going on. But I beat the final boss the first try and I was so ecstatic about it, I didn't even mind, just play through it again.
That's awesome.
Yes. And the interesting thing is the third time I played through the game, a new boss was actually just updated and introduced into the game. There was an old boss that was not much of a boss. It was just a survival where you had to memorize the pattern with Bomberman.
All right.
And a new boss was introduced that was Ganon, which is the latest boss that is now there. And I went back to just kind of see how difficult is it. After 30 minutes, I managed to beat that guy. And then I was just kind of curious whether there were other people maybe fighting it too. I knew about Twitch at the time, so I just searched for I Want to Be the Boshi and found Kalamandu and Nanoha and a few others that were just hanging out, streaming, and trying to beat the boss, and I gave them a few tips about it.
That's
and
cool.
It turns out they were also speedrunners. Well, at least Kalamandu was kind of the first real speedrunner of I Want to Be the Boshi, and he ended up just becoming really crazy good at that, which is basically where I kind of picked up the idea of just being in the background, routing and figuring out tricks for people, rather than doing runs myself.
Okay, so you've helped the community there. You were doing the tricks first, and then when they were streaming, you would just hop in and give tips about how you did things.
Yes, one way or another. I would also... That was kind of part of how I got to do more and more streaming myself, I would just do a little portion there, highlight it in order to show off, hey, you can do this differently, hey, this is slightly more optimal. Or if I found something rather crazy, I could just say, hey, you can skip this entire portion over here.
Oh, that's
Stuff
cool.
like that ended up just being interesting. Naturally, it was a lot of a community effort. Like, in the end, a lot of the time, I'm not the one who discovers little things or glitches or tricks like that, but I managed in a lot of cases to just put them to use or put them where they needed to be, which ended up, well, being introduced into the speedrun.
Oh, that's interesting. So you were using pre-existing glitches which were useless, and then you just told yourself, oh, but actually I could put it there. Oh, that's cool.
Yes. I think the most prominent example of that is the World 4 skip. There used to be, and that's an entire story by itself, I guess, but either way, there
We have
used to
time.
be, all right, we have time.
Yeah.
I tried to make it reasonably short anyways. Either
All
way,
right.
I like just kind of exploring, and there's a character called Sonic in I Wanna Be the Boshi that is definitely, it's just way faster, can jump way higher. It's a character you unlock after you beat hard mode with all 100% items.
Okay.
And with that character, you can go places where you absolutely were not intended to go, and I just liked exploring. So I took Sonic basically out of bounds in the fourth world, which is the PvP section.
Okay, yeah.
And I just realized, unlike every other world where I got out of bounds, the button actually does not kill me. And if I hold or fall far enough to the right, eventually I will enter the boss area. So that was the first knowledge I had about it. It was completely useless because we had no way of getting out of bounds. Until I realized that there was a weird corner where you could just hold right and get out of bounds, and suddenly it was useful for the speedrun. That place was eventually patched by the creator of the game, Sovereign, because it was so easy to accidentally get out of bounds there and confuse regular players. It was a good idea to fix it.
Yeah, okay.
So we still had the knowledge that out of bounds is actually really useful. And at some point, I learned about a specific trick where Zurai Ruffle at the time, or just Zurai as he is called now, he just spammed his bullets and suddenly he went through the floor. And that was interesting. At the time, I was actually at work in IT engineering when I was introduced, hey, there's just that interesting thing there. And it's a bit shameful to admit, but I downloaded the game at work and got to work. I literally played the game up until that point and started experimenting how to get through the floor. And I got through the floor, figured out a reliable setup, and that was interesting because initially it was not useful because you could not really get past the spikes in order to get out of bounds.
Okay.
But it turns out if you are pixel perfectly aligned with a wall and then just do a frame perfect turnaround on, you can actually just barely get past the spikes and then you're out of bounds again. So that's kind of how we had another out of bounds. Again, it's not really me necessarily figuring out the glitches and weirdness about the game, just putting them to use.
That's cool. That's really interesting. But how reliable was it? Like, there was a pixel perfect placement. That's all right. You can try it over again and have maybe a setup, or maybe you know on which pixel you have to align. The perfect pixel turnaround seems more complicated. How reliable was it? How many players or how many speedrunners did end up using it? Was it really good?
Let's put it this way, skipping the entirety of World 4 saves so much time that everybody used it.
Even if you fail, that's all right. Just try it again.
Yes. The thing is, trying again takes like 6 seconds.
All right.
So it's a reasonably significant amount of time, but not too bad. Compared to if you play through the world normally, which takes like 4 or 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So it is pretty significant. The thing is, I Wanna Be the Boshi is already really crazy difficult, so the players that keep playing it and are just really proficient at it, they don't really have much of a problem getting one frame perfect input right there reasonably consistently. Like the craziest guy at the time, Kalemandu, he had just the most insane consistency in that game where it was like how can he get the same trick that is, well, he got other tricks that were even crazier and even more difficult with frame perfect turnarounds while falling in a very specific position. He got that like 50% of the time, which is just mind-boggling to me.
Yeah.
Like, I can get it 1 in 20 tries, and he just got it half the time. It was ridiculously good.
Yeah, but that's practice for you, man, and
Yes.
muscle memory. At some point, you just get the feel for it, I guess. And I've seen players and I've seen runners do things I cannot understand to this day.
Yes. It's definitely a lot of practice, and
Yeah.
that's probably one of the trickiest things for me. I don't really practice. Like, my practice is figuring out this stuff and then
Okay.
just kind of trying to figure out what is reasonable, putting it to use, maybe finding alternatives. That is my practice. So I never really get consistent at things for the most part.
Okay. You're talking for I want to be the Boshi, or just in general in speedrunning?
Boshi and general as well.
Okay, so you test things, you work how the tricks is gonna work or what you've seen and try to put it to use. But by the point you figure it out, your buddy's already mastered it.
Not quite. It still takes quite a reasonable amount of time. It's just that I don't end up repeating the same process over and over again until I've mastered it. The process of figuring it out usually gives me enough mastery to look reasonably proficient, even
Yeah.
though I'm not consistent. But it will still take them quite a while to actually really get good at those kinds of things. Like, that's just the process of practice. And Kalamandu put in an insane amount of practice. Later, Whitwicks, who took the record from him, put in an even more insane amount of practice.
Yeah.
And then on top of that was later, even now, the current record holder, BBF, puts even more insane amounts of practice and grinding into the game. It's kind of crazy how consistent they are.
Yeah, the more player there is in the community for a game, and the more active they are, some games get crazy. I mean, if you talk, we were talking about Mario Brothers 1, you could also talk about Mario 64 or any of those really popular game. It's crazy what you can discover. It's crazy what you can do. Like, the ones that fascinates me, maybe mostly in Mario 64, are those glitches or things you find, and maybe it's found by a tasser or something, and it's considered as not being doable by a human, and then it is, and that breaks my mind every time. Like, and you see it in a task, and you're like, that's crazy. The guy's got to jump forward, then go backward and press A in a rhythm 34 times in a row, and maybe, just maybe, he will clip through the door, and then he does.
Yes.
And that's awesome. That's so much fun to watch. You can watch a run, like, you can watch 50 runners from 50 different run, and they all do the same tricks with very much consistency, and every time it destroys my mind. Even if it's the 50th time I'm watching it, I'm still mind boggled.
Yes, absolutely. I do agree.
Yeah. So moving from I want to be the Boshi, what's next on your list? What's the next thing you tackle?
The next thing I tackled was Seeker of Mana, and kind of in a similar vein, I didn't really intend to speedrun it myself.
Okay.
I was just really interested, and there was essentially certain things that I just noticed about the game where I watched Luigi Meister at the time just play through the game with 2 controllers, which was pretty intriguing to me already, since, well, it never crossed my mind that you could go for a rule set of your own. That's actually kind of a separate topic. Speedrunners Archives was just my go-to website for speedruns, and they had specific rules. I kind of asked them, hey, what about if I use 2 controllers for specific instances? And by Speedrunners Archive standards, that is just considered to be a co-op run, regardless of whether you have a co-op partner or not.
Yeah.
And Luigi Meister decided to just, you know what, he just plays the game with 2 controllers anyways, because why not? And that was really fascinating to me. So I ended up just kind of watching him a bunch and watch his runs, and got really interested in the entire thing. So I tried it out myself for just spontaneously. Let's just see how quick I can go through this as well. And turns out pretty quick, I guess.
Oh yeah, yeah, pretty quick, of course. This is probably the game you're most renowned for.
Yes, you could say that, I guess.
Yeah, and even if we go on your stream, we'll see very quickly that this is a game close to your heart. There's your chat. If we don't see it right away, your chat will make sure that we know about it. There will be rabbits everywhere. The sprite for sprite, the sprite for how was it called in the remastered Popoy?
Yes.
Yeah. Will be probably somewhere around it. If you play, actually, you've played Link to the Past randomizer today, and you were playing as Mug. But sometimes you do take Sprite. Sprite is a playable character in it.
It is indeed as well.
Yeah,
That's really good in it.
and that is the game I've known you for at first too. I was a big fan of Secret of Mana when I was young. I saw a run for it, and I'm not sure, but I think the first time I saw you run it was a one player, two controller. On GDQ. Is that possible?
That is definitely possible. I did do a one-player, two-controller run, although the first time Secret of Mana was at a more, let's say, modern state in terms of speedrunning. It was a two-player, three-controller run with Stinger PA at HDQ 2014. So yeah, there's that too.
All right.
But yes, it's pretty much my main game, so to speak. It's the one game where I actually care about having the record in. Although, right now I don't have it, so it's going to be back to a grind very soon.
I can't wait to see your stream for that. I never have enough of a Secret of Mana.
Nice.
I just told it earlier, but there was a remaster for Secret of Mana, and I've seen you, I think it was with El Magus, where you commentated on a run, like earlier this year.
Yes, there was essentially the speedrunning community, or a community for speedrunning the remaster, kind of formed reasonably quickly. I was more or less naturally part of it, and I also did a few runs myself. But I felt like running that game isn't quite up my alley. It's just different in a weird way, even though I like the remaster to an extent, despite its flaws. It's just not quite my thing, so I decided I would rather do commentary for it. So yeah, there's that.
You did a really good job. It was really fun to watch, and the two runners did a really good job too. And I saw a few differences, like you said, but I've played it casually and I really enjoyed it, like you said, despite its flaws, but did really have a good time too. And I guess from a speedrunning standpoint, would it feel like it's enough of a different game so you'd have to start training again from scratch, but at the same time similar enough that it feels as if you've done it before?
How to put it? The one thing that feels familiar is the general concept of the game and also the maps on how or where I need to go next. Beyond that, the gameplay, since I'm so familiar with the little details about Secret of Mana, just feels fairly different overall. Like, it's the same concept as mentioned, but it's still very different to me anyways.
Yeah, okay, I get that. So, Secret of Mana comes in, you work real hard, and you end up having world record for quite a long time. How long were you standing? I didn't even know you were dethroned. Who's the dethroner?
The dethroner name is Zeal, that is Zheal.
Yeah.
And he's a speedrunner who dethroned actually quite a lot of people that were really well renowned and also had really strong records in their own respect, like Secret of Evermore as well.
All right.
I think a few others. And he is just the kind of guy that seems to be really grinding out those runs to get them to a really solid and strong level. The thing is about Secret of Mana, when played through controller, I'm very much driven by competition. And there have been, let's say, 3-4 new tricks and glitches and skips that saved about 30 seconds to a minute each themselves, since I last time had a really serious attempt at getting good runs in. that it was not too difficult for him to get the record. But he didn't just get the record, he actually got a really crazy good run in. And that means it will be really difficult to get the record back currently. But at the same time, I'm somewhat looking forward to that too.
Oh, that's awesome. I get you on that too. Like I said, I did dabble a little bit in speedrunning. And when I did, I was playing a dead game. There was a world record owner, but he was alone on the leaderboard. And he wasn't running it anymore. So all I had to do was beat the score there, and I would be there probably forever. And at some point, I did decide to communicate with him. I heard about a trick that he discovered, which was very simple, but I didn't know about. And I've asked him if he could show me, and he decided he would. He would do actually a full run just to show me how he thinks, and just a little chill stream for fun. And since the tricks was at the very beginning, like in the first 5 minutes, I would get what I wanted, and then I could concentrate on try to see how he does things. And he had there was parts where he was really good. There was part in which I knew I was better than he was, and so I thought I could maybe shave a little bit of time. And during that little chill stream, he bet world record like for a minute. Like it's a 45-minute games, and he just shoved a minute in my face. And that was awesome, but at the same time it was soul crushing. I was like, oh, I'm getting there, but nope, I have to beat a minute faster now. And I never did it, but I'm working on that. Yeah.
Nice.
No, go on.
Nice. Yeah, it does definitely sound like some neat tricks, and hey, can you show me that? One of the tricky things in a lot of speedrunning has been for a long time documentation about tricks and stuff. Like, especially in games that have been around for quite a while and people keep working on, suddenly certain tricks are no longer necessary because, well, other things gets discovered, but maybe the knowledge about them and being able to implement them in different ways or in different places could be relevant for certain things. Like, I do remember in the relatively early days of speedrunning, I want to be the Boshi. I knew about certain old techniques and strategies still that people just kind of forgot or never even knew about in the first place. And it was really easy to implement them in different places instead. And so that just kind of blew more or less new runner's mind because, hey, how did you know that you could do that?
Because it came from older knowledge that was no longer necessary.
Yes. Nowadays, it's a lot easier to keep track. Like we created a pretty extensive document about secret of mana, tricks, glitches, and all those kinds of things. I have a pretty gigantic spreadsheet for that game too. And if anyone would ever want to request some information, I can redirect them to them. Although, I have to admit, it's not entirely up to date. So, while it's easier to centralize information about the games on speedrun.com or similar resources, you still need to have those people that actually put the work in to document them. And unfortunately, I tend to be a bit on the lazy side on that end.
All right. But that's also an archivist's job. Like, I mean, it gets updated so quickly that you have to work on that all the time, and even when you're done you have to start from scratch again because new things has been discovered. And I understand why some games are so quickly updated, but some do get like when I started to run the game, which is Azure Dream, by the way. Maybe people will be asking themselves what game I was running. It's Azure Dreams from the PS1. There was absolutely, or like almost no documentation. And I'm not talking about speedrunning. I'm talking like at all. Even if you go on GameFAQs or the older place where you would find some tricks, infos, tips, or walkthrough, actually, you would find very little. And when I was young, and I'm talking like way before I knew what speedrunning was, I did start a booklet that I bought, and I was mapping, not mapping, but taking information about everything, like how many HPs that monster have, what can he drops, what spell can he learn. And so I just, because the game is really hard and the speedrun is just crazy stupid, like you have to go on from floor 1 to floor 40 in one go. The game has been designed so you go back to town and level up and take your time and do multiple run. But it has to be beaten in a single playthrough if you want to have a shot at the world record for the game. And starting from floor 6, and there's 40 of them, you cannot fight anymore because you're too underpowered. Like, it's not even conceivable. Like, there could be 20 enemies on the floor, and one of them can solo one-shot kill you.
That sounds pretty extreme.
Yeah, but that's a lot of fun. That you would get the same kind of feel from an ancient cave from Lufia 2.
I see. Nice.
Yeah. So, world record owner, which is called Ryuken, has done 130-somethings attempt and finished 3 of them. Which
That's
were all... and they were all world records. Each time he did beat his last, And there's actually on speedrun.com there's a third runner which I never could get my hands on, but his speedrun is not really fast. It's double the time of world record right now, and
I finished the run.
But he did finish the run, and he did say, because you can leave a little bit of a comment, he did say that he knew it was not the best run ever, but the space was blank, and he did finish the run, which is quite a thing. And he does that's why he's first on that leaderboard, because he's the only one who've put his name there, and that's awesome. The run is actually pretty fun to watch too.
That's nice.
You did your fair share of AGDQ. I think from the first time you got there, you've been on each of them, right? Almost each of them.
Kind of, yes. The first time I was at a GDQ was AGDQ 2014, where I ran Seeker of Mana with Stinger PA Co-op, and also I Want to Be the Guy guiding that actually at that event too.
Oh, I missed that run. I gotta go and look it up.
Yes, at least I think it was 2014. Might have been next year. Either way, the next year I ended up running a rather silly game for the awful game Stomp Quick Block that I actually was introduced to during the previous HDQ. That is called Rogueman X, and it's just an NES game that is not really a bootleg, but you can kind of think of it that way. It's special. I can recommend you watch the run on YouTube.
I will. So how is it called?
Rogueman X. It's actually not Rockman X. It's Rogueman with a C.
Okay.
So it's kind of like Rockman X, but not really.
Okay, yeah, I get it.
It's kind of silly. And the next year, 2016, I ended up running Seeker of Mana 1-player 2-controller. So unfortunately, Stinger, I don't think he could attend at that time. Okay. So I was just, I'm just going to run this game 1-player 2-controller style. And also I ran Goof Troop 1-player 2-controller, because I kind of figured that's an interesting thing to do as well.
Super game, by the way. I've had a lot of fun casually and watching speedrun of that game. That game's crazy.
Yes, it's actually really, really well done. I really enjoy it. So then HDQ 2017 I was at, but I didn't play any games. I was on the couch for one with the Hulk, and I was also just kind of around for other runs, but I didn't run any games. I didn't basically get into it. I also didn't have anything useful to offer, to be completely frank.
All right.
2018, unfortunately, I just don't really have the money to go to GDQs too much anymore, since my main focus at this point is RPG Limit Break.
Yeah, which you attended this year, and with Tale of Fantasia run, which was awesome, by the way.
Thank you. Yes, Tales of Fantasia is a really, really intriguing game. Maybe not the best speedrun, but I really like the game.
Yeah, but I really enjoyed the part where you were talking during that run, where you were chatting about the fact that you routed the Maxwell dungeon. Almost by yourself, and you were really proud about it. And it blew my mind, because you do use some kind of exploit where you use an Aldi bottle, which prevent encounter for X amount of step. I think is it random?
255 steps.
255 steps. And that when you interact with something like anything you can interact with, a button or something or a lever,
Yes.
you can get your 250 steps back.
Kind of, yes. Basically, you overflow the step counter because for some reason it increases your step counter until the next encounter by one, and the game can't handle numbers above 255 for that
Yeah.
specific value. And
Yeah.
so it just kind of rolls over to zero, and only the next room after you do a screen transition, it restarts the step counter. So you can gain a lot of steps in many rooms just by clever use of that.
But you have to be at one step. You have to be at one step before the next encounter and then interact, so it goes to zero for it to work.
Not quite.
Not quite.
No,
Okay, sorry.
you have to use a holy bottle and then right after use or interact with a switch. So it's way simpler than that.
Okay. But
But
still,
it's easy to control.
yeah. But that seemed like a really interesting use of a simple glitch to do. I remember playing that casually, that dungeon, and I was probably way over leveled than you were. And I remember pulling my hair out because that dungeon is crazy and stupid.
Yes.
That was yeah.
The encounter rate for the Super Nintendo version of that game is really high. And if you don't know that running doubles the encounter rate, well, you run into an encounter literally every few steps. It's
Yeah.
pretty
And I
crazy
didn't
like that.
know, and I was getting an encounter every 5 steps. That was, and there's a lot of puzzle. And the first time you play that, you don't know them by heart. You have to
Yes.
learn them, and then you go into a room, and then you have to go back into the first room, and then go back into the second room, and then go back into the first room, and you're getting 10 encounters every time you screen transition. That was not a lot of fun.
Yes, it's pretty extreme on that. That's
Yeah.
kind of probably the less ideal design of that game.
But it was so satisfying when you did get the Maxwell summon at the end, and like the dungeon in general it was the only part that was so bad during the game that I remember anyway. But yeah, that was a really fun part, and I'm really impressed that you did route it yourself. Even though the glitch seems to be easier than I thought it was still quite a job.
Yeah. For me personally, Tales of Fantasia is kind of more or less my favorite project in speedrunning at this point, since the way I ended up getting to speedrun that game is I had 1 week, which I called the focus week, just focusing on Tales of Fantasia, routing the speedrun and getting a speedrun done at least at the end of the week. And I've done a few of those focus weeks before, and usually I got a few runs done during the week. But for Tales of Fantasia, it took me entire 6 days of just purely routing and figuring out stuff until I finally, on the last day, had an entirely complete route in order to run through the game. And that was quite the experience, because unlike a lot of other games, as it was probably the case for your speedrun game as well, there was information there, but not a whole lot.
Yeah.
Like, there was tricks you needed to just kind of gather information. I pulled information from taskvideos.org, which is where I actually figured out, hey, you can increase your step counter by doing this. I experimented with it. I looked at some RAM values in order to see how many steps it takes until I get to the next encounter. I experimented what I needed. There was one run by a Japanese runner on Nico Video. Basically, Nico Video is the Japanese YouTube.
Yeah.
And that runner, he was not particularly fast. Let me be honest. He was more than 2 hours slower than me.
Okay.
But it was a really good template on what to do and where to go, and kind of he pretty much took all the safety features you could take. And I could take the run from there and then just gradually cut off things that were not necessary, I didn't need, optimize strategies and routes and all those kinds of things. Quite a few things from that run originally actually are still in the run because they end up just being really useful.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes. So it was really an experience just piecing and puzzling all the information together and making the best run of it, where there was technically a run before. There was even a tool-assisted speedrun, but the technique I discovered during the routing process, where I overflow the Holy Bottle step counter, that was not a thing at the time for the tool-assisted speedrun or the Japanese runner, so they just kind of did without.
Yeah, I've tried to find tool-assisted speedrun for Azure Dreams, and I did find one. It's on YouTube. We never could contact the person who made it, but I did talk about it with Ryuken, which, like I said, was the world record owner. The tool-assisted speedrun is sadly very useless because the game on each floor are randomly generated, like you would get on an ancient cave, like I said on Lufia 2, and you have to find you cannot fight, and you don't need to because the final boss is scripted, so you don't have to be powerful enough to beat it. So if you're lucky, when you get on a new floor, there will be the stair for the next floor just around the corner, and the tasks manipulate RNG so that every time it lands on a floor, the staircase is next to him.
Uh-huh.
So the speedrun, instead of being 40 minutes, is like 2 minutes 30.
Wow.
Which includes 2 minutes of mashings before the game starts. So yeah, that's
very extreme. That sounds like a lot like the segmented Diablo 1 run.
Oh, is it?
Yes, the Diablo 1 is pretty much the exact same as you just explained, and the manipulated, or I don't know whether it's tool-assisted, but at least manipulated run is literally staircase next to staircase, next to staircase, next to staircase. Do a bit of glitching in order to beat the final boss, and you're done.
Yeah. You don't even need that in Azure Dreams, but of course you cannot manipulate it, or at least we have not found a way to manipulate it yet. To get to the next floor and have this information. Probably with if it is time based, you probably just use an emulator and loaded the game and try to step on the staircase at a different timing, so that when the next floor load, it would get a different setting and save load until you get the floor you need, which you can do in a task setting, but you can't do in a speedrun setting. So we have to do it the hard way, and we have to fight our way through against monster we can't beat.
Yes, indeed, and which actually makes it really appealing, because it's for that kind of game, it's pretty much never the same feel twice, is it?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's like I said, it's very similar to Ancient Caves, so you don't know what you're getting into. The fact that there's no end boss is really fun for me. The end battle is just a script. People are talking, and then you strike the boss once and he dies because things happen. But to me, it was really appealing. I really like to watch people practice runs that will never change. So it's really skill-based. But personally, I couldn't do that. There's something really interesting in testing my mind more than my hands, to me. I needed that. That's the type of game I really enjoyed. And when I was younger, I was introduced to that game due to randomness. I didn't want to buy it, and if I wanted to buy my PS1, the person who was selling it to me told me I had to buy all the games he had bundled, and it was a lot of money for a young man such as I was. And I was like, yeah, but I don't want your games. I already have games at home that are waiting. I was gonna buy my PS1 for Final Fantasy VII, of course, and there was this Azure Dream game in his bundle, and I didn't want to buy it. And he told me, yeah, it's that or nothing. So at the end, I did buy it. It was a lot of money, but I came home and I told myself, yeah, Final Fantasy VII is still gonna be there. I think I'm gonna try them just to see what I got. And I've put that CD in the disc tray, started it, and I didn't play Final Fantasy VII for 2 weeks. Yep.
Nice.
Completely hooked to that game. That was crazy. It's still one of my favorite games of all time. And the randomness of it makes it that I never get tired or bored. All the information and the manipulation I have are still useful. I do feel like I progress, I get better, but each and every run tests me in different ways.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds very interesting. For me, it's always that kind of balance. As you said, I'm not all that interested in games which are basically solved, that you just need to execute properly.
Yeah.
I'm more interested in games that have what I call the good kind of randomness, where it's like enemies can give you certain patterns that lose you a second or two, but it's throughout the entire game, and it just kind of balances out overall. But in order for you to only lose 1 or 2 seconds, you need to react properly and adapt just kind of on every little detail. And that's kind of the type of thing I really like, which is a big portion of Secret of Mana.
Yeah, exactly. You do need to learn the pattern that the enemies can give you. You do need to learn how to react to them. You do need to learn a lot of things, and it's super satisfying when it comes up and you have to react and you know how to, but
Hmm.
you don't know until the enemy animation starts how it will react. Yeah, I
I
can get
see.
out. It's a lot of fun.
Excellent.
So, Secret of Mana, Tale of Fantasia, what's next? Is it still gonna be Tale of Fantasia? You told me that you were going back to Secret of Mana, which I can't wait for, to try and get back the throne. What's next?
Yes.
What's in the future for Yagamoth?
The future actually doesn't really hold any speedrun projects aside from the games I already run currently.
All right.
Like, I'm relatively spontaneous about those kinds of things. If I feel like, hey, that's a game I kind of would like to have a good reason to play again, might as well consider speedrunning it. So that's kind of what I tend to do. Overall, for me, speedrunning at this point, it's very fascinating, but it's, in a sense, one type of challenge run that I like. But there's also other types of challenge runs that I do enjoy with many other games. For example, upcoming is the 4-job Fiesta for Final Fantasy V, where
Yeah.
you are assigned 4 jobs out of the 22 available. You can only use those 4, and it's a challenge to beat the game with those. Sometimes a bigger challenge, sometimes an easier one,
Yeah.
but it's always a bit different, and the class combinations really makes it intriguing. So I really, really enjoyed challenge runs in general, which, well, for specifically speedrunning, I don't really have anything else planned aside from getting back into Secret of Mana.
Yeah, but that's still awesome. Like we've told earlier, you are a part of the Link to the Past tournament right now. Also,
Yes, randomizer.
yep, Rendo. That's a lot of fun to watch. I'm like right now, if we're talking about streaming in general and Twitch, I think 90% of the run I'm watching is a Link to the Past Rendo and Free Enterprise, which is a Final Fantasy IV randomizer.
I see, yes.
I There's something there, and I cannot tell you why, but there's something there that I can never get bored with. And I know the randomizer part of it sure makes it interesting and intriguing and mysterious, but the racing of those two types of game right now, I cannot get enough of it. That's crazy.
Nice. Yes, I definitely feel very similar. Although it starts to just kind of decline a little bit
Yep.
in Zelda Randomizer for me because I've seen so many things at this point. It starts repeating itself in small increments, but it's still just different every time. Still,
Yeah, and it's fun to see as spectator sports, like on the viewers type standpoint. It's very fun to watch how the same seed is played by two different runners, what their decision are, and like the gambles, like where someone decides to take a gamble, and it has to be it has to be thought before it is done. Like it's not any kind of gamble, but you have to think about that there would be 8 chests there, 7 there. My opponent's gonna go for the 8 because it's statistically better, but I'm gonna go for the 7 because I want to get an edge, and that's a lot of fun. And sometimes it pays off, sometimes it doesn't. And of course, at the end of the day, it's a little bit of luck, but execution is really important in that game too.
yes, absolutely. Execution actually kind of plays an interesting role in the metagame of randomizer. Like, if you have a one-on-one race against someone who you know is, let's say, execution-wise not as good,
Yeah.
you can just kind of take it safer, not take as many risks, maybe go out of your way to check certain things that you would like to normally skip because it takes another minute, but you know your execution is going to make up for it. But also vice versa, where you know your opponent is most likely going to be better than you. You need to just feel like, alrighty, I don't necessarily want to take too many gambles, but if I don't go and check this one chest over here, it's going to save me 2 minutes. And then you just kind of build up on that, and because it's randomized, that chest could be necessary or important, but you kind of hope it isn't. And you play it by the numbers in a sense. It's a lot like poker.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, it's a lot like poker. You've got to take a chance on a few things, and you say that, and you just actually did it. You ended up going into Super Bunny Cave in your last run just like an hour ago, where you would find two chests there, one of which has got the boots, which you don't know if it's required or not. Enter into Ganon Tower and being probably very reprieve when you discovered that the pedestal was only holding a quarter of a heart.
Yes. I guess maybe as a quick overview for people that may not be familiar with Zelda Link to the Past, the boots are used to run, and with running you can bump into things, and certain items, because it's randomized where they are necessary for you to progress. And there's 1 out of 22 locations where you have to have the boots in the final dungeon in order for you to get the big key out of it. And if that's a 1 in 22 chance that you need the boots, and I didn't have the boots because I decided to skip certain chests that were technically along the way, but I didn't feel like I had the time to check them, so I went straight for the dungeon since, well, I don't know what it was in those chests.
Yeah, and it ended up being the boots, so it would have been a good thing to check them up, but at the same time, I get what you were thinking. This is less than 5% chance that the boots is required anyway, and you were at the end of the game, so running faster wouldn't help you in any kind of fashion. So that was an interesting calculated risk. I would have opened both chests, and I saw you not do it, and chat went crazy, by the way, and that was fun. And then I just stopped and think to myself, okay, why didn't he do it? And then it was actually a simple calculation, but I just didn't do it. I saw the two chests, and I told myself, like, it takes not even 30 seconds to open both. And I'm like, yeah, but actually that's 30 seconds you could shave. The chances that it's required are so low anyway. Why not? Why not try it?
Indeed, and the chances that the boots are specifically exactly there were also kind of low. Like,
yeah, of course.
There were a lot more locations in Ganon's Tower where the boots could have been, even if the boots were required for Ganon's torch. Since I checked so many other locations already, chances are actually pretty decent that the boots would be in Ganon's Tower at the time anyways.
Statistically, yes. All right.
Exactly.
I
mean,
sorry.
Real quick, sorry. I mean, in the end, it's, as I said, a numbers game. Those two chests were just the most obvious examples of things I didn't check, but there were quite a few other places along the way that I ended up just kind of not going to and skipping because I didn't feel like it was necessary to check them.
Yeah.
Or it was just a bit longer, like instead of 10 seconds for those two chests, it would have taken me like 20 to check 2 other chests. But those just add up.
Of course it does. And like you said, that's a number game. At the end of the day, the more you know about the logic, and the logic is how the games decide what can be put where, because an item cannot be behind the requirement for that item. And also, if there's a chain of items that are required, an item cannot be behind the chain either. So the more you know about how the game logic works, the more you know that actually, even though there's 12 chests in that dungeon, none of them may be the item you're looking for. So why would you go into the dungeon unless it's required, like a crystal dungeon, which you would still leave for the end anyway, when you don't have anything else to do, when you're in go mode.
Pretty much, indeed.
All right, yeah, but that's really interesting to me. The risk calculation and the understanding of a game is really interesting to me, and that's why I probably really prefer randomizer in some kind of a way, and that's probably why the game I decided to run, even though not that much, was randomized in a way. The understanding of what can happen really it really is something I really like.
Yes, because it kind of keeps you thinking, keeps you on your toes, and you kind of try to, at some point, like, you can't just be along for the ride and see what's in the next chest and then figure out what you do with the item from the chest from there.
Exactly.
But at some point, you just kind of start trying to think ahead. Alrighty, if I get this thing here, what is my next step afterwards? What is going to be my next move? So you have less hesitation in between the things you do.
Exactly. And
And it just evolves from there. It's kind of like a fighting game too. You just think about 3, 4 steps ahead at a time.
yeah, fighting games, yeah, of course. Like you want to see what connects in the first fourth of the battle, what you can do, what are the strength and the weakness of your opponent, which you do have in the fighting games. You won't get that in a race because it's blind, but as soon as you know what connects, now it's just like
Exploiting that.
yeah, exploiting that and exploration of what, yeah, exploration first, exploiting it after, and that's a lot of fun, and I really enjoy fighting games actually. All right. I've asked you during the pre-interview if there was a subject that you would like to talk about, and I think we have dabbled in it a lot, but I think we might want to give it a fresh go or just try to see it from another angle. When I asked you what you were interested in talking about, you told me that even though you really like the community and the human part of speedrunning, what really drove you or really made you want to get into that universe was the under the hood, how a game works and getting information about it. Like you said, making spreadsheet probably, or just finding and learning about everything a game could have to offer more than just what you would get in the casual playthrough.
Yes, indeed. It's definitely a gigantic portion where you're not just playing a game anymore, you are starting to learn a game rather than just being along for the ride for the experience. You are more of an observer to just see and figure out certain oddities, maybe certain things that don't quite line up for the game in the engine. Maybe you can squeeze in between there, stuff like that. But also just the pure numbers game, really, where you figure, alrighty, what is the minimum requirement for me to go ahead and beat certain enemies or bosses? What are the milestones that I need to reach in order to get to the next part? And you kind of try to get or go from there, from let's say the final boss, what do you need at least or the minimum, what are my strategies? Then you reiterate the strategies because certain things might just be easier. Like a strategy might not be the optimal one, but because it takes you less time to set it up, it might end up being faster. It's a gigantic process of iteration and reiteration, figuring out new tech and new strategies, and then suddenly a casual player comes by and tells you, hey, why don't you do that? And you think, yeah, why don't I do that?
And that does happen.
Awesome. Yes, it absolutely does happen.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of frequent-ish, I would say, at least in the early days of speedrunning Secret of Mana, that we would just watch someone play the game casually, and something weird happen, and we just go, I wonder whether we can do something with that. And in certain instances, it turns out to be consistent and it's useful. Although, to be fair, in most instances, like, yeah, that was just pure luck, and that's not consistent at all.
Yeah. When I was playing Azure Dreams, actually one time Ryuken, I went on his stream, but one time he did come on mine, and he was watching me play the game, and we played the game really differently. You have a player, a character you control, but you also have monsters that fight with you, some kind of a Pokemon-ish game. And during the speed run, you only use one monster, which is the one they gave you at the beginning. And in that game, monsters tend to get really stronger than the player. One thing, for example, every time you quit the tower on a casual playthrough and you go back in, you're going back to level 1, but your monster don't. So they tend to scale way faster than you do because you have to go back to level 1 each and every time. Mm-hmm. So you tend to get to use them a lot, and they have a lot of shortcuts you can use in the game with R1 and R2 buttons. So you can control what you want your monster to do next, and it's way slower than letting the monster play itself with the AI. But and I guess the Ryuken didn't realize that, or maybe it did and just thought it wouldn't be useful. But when you attack with your character, you attack, then your monster does, then the enemy does, and then it's another round. So it's turn-based. But when you tell your monster to attack, actually it's you not doing anything, then the monster move, then your monster attack, and there's a difference in how the turn order would go up. So if you followed a little bit, I've discovered that you could tell your monster to attack an empty square, and that would be the empty square the enemy would move on its turn. You would do nothing, you would relent your turn, because there's nobody in melee yet. The enemy moves into the square because you know the AI of the monster. Your pet attack, then you attack, then it's still your pet's turn, because turn order is different depending on if you attack or if you relent your turn. And you would get a triple attack before the enemy would move, which is slower than letting the AI play itself, but the extra attack I get in a round do give me a chance to fight monster for longer in a tower, which increase my survivals like tenfold.
I see. That's interesting. Basically exploiting the system in a way that, well, may or may not be intended.
Yeah, no, it's not.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Sounded a bit like Mystic Quest to me, where it's useful to give in Mystic Quest. It's a very basic game, very simple. I like it.
Yeah.
It's faster to have your partner being AI controlled because you don't have to input for them.
Exactly.
But they tend to not necessarily do the correct thing. So it's a bit of a balance between you controlling them exactly when you need to. But also, sometimes they can do things that you could not possibly do yourself. Like, for example, if the enemy moves first and kills your character, your ally could revive you in the same turn, even though they don't need to input their command before the turn starts, so to speak.
Yeah.
So they can literally react during the turn, which can be very handy.
Yeah,
So
because if you wanted to revive a character, you'd have to know that it would die and prepped. Could you prep a reviving item or reviving skill on a live character? Yeah, but you'd have to know that the enemy would kill it, so you'd have to gamble it anyway, which would be useless.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that little tidbits, but that's interesting. And because the AI decide what it does not during when you input it, but when it's actually its turn, it will react on what happened before during the same round.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, that's really cool. Huh. What was the piece of information that you did find or that somebody else did find in the world of speedrunning? It can be on a game you play, it can be on any kind of game, that blew your mind the most.
That blew my mind the most.
Yeah.
The easiest way to answer that one is probably in Secret of Mana, but I have a little anecdote before that for a little game called Lost Kingdoms for the GameCube.
Okay.
It's kind of a backwards blew my mind because here's how it works. When I was a kid, I played that game. I liked it. I played it a bunch, and at some point, I decided to just kind of randomly walk towards the entrance of the level, which is just an invisible wall. You cannot go any further. Mm-hmm. But at some point, I realized, hey, you can actually go a bit further here than usual. And the game just keeps asking, hey, you are walking backwards. Would you like to go back to the world map? And I said no, and I just kept walking, and it asked me, do you want to go back to the world map? You said, continue, no. And eventually your character just falls through the ground, and you can literally walk on air towards the end of the stage.
Oh.
In Lost Kingdoms. It was a bridge level. And the thing is, what blew my mind at the time is I knew about that since I was a kid. And in my mind, speedrunners know everything. They know everything about the game. They explore it all that way. And literally, when I was just thinking about that game again at some point and explored the speedrun, they just told me, yeah, we kind of discovered this last week when I knew it since literally 6, 7, 8 years already. I was just like, oh, I guess they are not all knowing the speedrunners. And that was just, in a sense, a different kind of mind-blowing, because speedrunners are really not all-knowing.
No.
Casual gamers that can suggest things and suddenly, hey, yeah, that's actually pretty clever.
Actually, it is. Like I said, my experience was only with another community member, but even then, each of us knew that our experience with the game was completely different. The way we played and the way we tried to optimize or exploit the most from each and every situation was so different that we had a lot to bring to each other. Sadly, like I said, we had already moved on to other games at that time, but it was quite a lot of fun. Still, the 2 or 3 times we met and tried to look at each other's way they run, it was cool, and we were giving each other tips. Like the fact that they use a really magic AV strats, which is actually really good. I still use it today, but I was more of a warrior setup, and warrior is really good. It's more consistent, but I think mage is better once you get the hang of it. So yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Makes sense. Alrighty, and maybe the one thing that really blew my mind in Secret of Mana was I knew about certain glitches just kind of before I even got into speedrunning it, and at some point I was just starting to explore the various things you can do with those tricks and glitches. Most of those were actually not used in speedrunning in any capacity, but Secret of Mana for the Super Nintendo is just kind of so easily broken, let's put it that way, that it is just a lot of fun to just play around with various things. And there's that pretty famous early mana stored glitch where you do a series of events, and I just kind of investigated that series of events. You go and land at the Frost Forest, Nico, and save there, and suddenly your save file is really weird, and you can hold the start, select, and L and R buttons for a few seconds in order to soft reset the game, and then you load that save file, and you load it to where you are actually currently at, which doesn't necessarily sound useful immediately, until you realize you can save warp to places which you can no longer get to.
Yeah.
Such as cutscenes. And the very first cutscene of the game, your characters are invisible. The game basically uses that as a means to progress the cutscene. It's actually kind of clever about it. But because you can't get into a cutscene with a full party, the game just kind of says, hey, you have a full party, you should not be here, you already have seen this cutscene, teleports you to a village, and suddenly you have invisible characters. And those invisible characters have really strange properties in that while a text box is active, when you have at least one invisible character in your party, you can walk through walls.
Oh, that's cool.
So, yes, using that knowledge, I tried to kind of introduce or figure out a skip that is called the Grand Palace skip. So I experimented with those invisible characters, which apparently invisible characters were already known at the time. I did not know about it, but previous speedrunners of the game knew about it. They just never really put it to use, so to speak. And I did two things with those invisible characters. For one, a random other trivia knowledge about the game ended up being useful, where all the maps in Secret of Mana wrap around, meaning as long as you walk far enough to the north, eventually you will end up being in the south again.
Yep.
So I used those invisible characters the first time in order to get into the trials early on top of the lofty mountains. Basically, invisible characters cannot walk into cutscene triggers or also screen transitions. So you could literally walk past the screen transition trigger, which would normally bring you out of the cave, and just be behind it. Then you turn to the left and press B, and you remotely interact with the first available object, which happens to be the Sage Chalk in that cave, and that brings your party to you. And even though you have at least one visible character in order to do that, they can now suddenly go through the walls as well.
Oh.
So, with that knowledge, I ended up going essentially into the trials early. But that was not really useful yet, because we still needed to have all the mana spirits in order to essentially activate those orbs and open passages in the Grand Palace, since you literally, by the game's design, you need all 8 spirits in order to open up passages with their magic. We could skip already 1 or 2 of them, but, well, going up into the lofty mountains would technically allow us to get into the Grand Palace early, but it was not useful. But with figuring out that I can walk through walls with invisible characters, suddenly I could go literally backwards through the main entrance of the Grand Palace, which is normally cut off because you're supposed to go the underground section first and then through the main entrance at the bottom rather than the top. Suddenly I could go literally backwards through the Grand Palace, activate 3 switches, and then go back to the main room where there's the boss, and suddenly I could move on and skip the entirety of um, 4 of the necessary spirits that are required to traverse the Grand Palace.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my first really, what I consider big discovery in the speedrunning of a already reasonably well-established game as a speedrun. Was just like, suddenly I did a pretty big thing.
Yeah, and it did serve you because this is like I said, your speedrun, your time is really good, and but that was discovered by you. It was already tidbits that was known during from the community, but you did patch them up. Sorry, and you did make a big skip out of it. Actually, 2 big skips.
Yes, pretty much. So the first big skip there is where you would normally need to enter 2 temples.
Yep.
And some little side mission in order to get into the trials.
Yeah, because the sage is not there when you
Yes.
come in the first time. Yeah.
Later on, we actually figured out a quicker way of doing that instead of creating a visible cactus twice. But that was definitely part of it.
Okay. And the second part, which is the skip, which you were barred from because you would need the mana seed, but then you skipped needing the mana seed anyway.
Yes, indeed.
Oh, that's awesome. I really like it. All right. We will actually talk a lot about Secret of Mana because you will teach me a little trick, I think.
Yes, indeed.
It is called the Barrel Super Slide.
Yes.
Okay.
You can basically get up a ramp, which you're not normally supposed to, although it's not all that difficult, even casually, to get up. It just takes a long time, normally, unless you employ that tactic.
Ooh, we will learn a lot more about that soon. But just before we leave this part of the podcast, I would prepare the ending for it.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to know, Yagamoth, was there some other people you wanted to shout out? Just people that maybe the viewers would be interested in. If they don't know you, of course, they can go to your Twitch, Yagamoth. It's on screen. But of course, there would be other people that you think that might be interested if they liked what they've heard about you today. Who else should they go and look at?
So, I did prepare this a little bit. And
Ooh.
I feel like currently the person I personally like to just kind of watch, or to be fair, more specifically listen to the most, is Gyre. That is Gyre and then an underscore at the end.
Yep.
Gyre is mainly a Final Fantasy speedrunner, Final Fantasy 1, and he just knows the speedruns for all versions, and he has done runs of all versions.
Yep.
He currently does no longer have the record for the regular any percent category, but he had that for a really long time. His time is really, really good, and it's a pretty insane and brutal run. But he also did a lot of challenge runs of that game on all the different versions of the Final Fantasy games as well. Just kind of Final Fantasy 1 is his thing. He also plays other games that are of more questionable nature, such as Virtual Highlight.
Which you might have seen from RPG Limit Break if you watched this year. He was the runner for a Virtual Highlight, yes.
Yes, Virtual Highlight is a gem of a game, and
Yes.
he's just such a fun guy to hang around and be around. But I really like his chill and relaxed atmosphere that he provides for his streams. So basically, that's kind of where my shout out goes with Gyre.
That's awesome. I've actually watched a lot of his run lately, especially because you told me that you would shout out him. And I did know the guy. I've seen it. I think he's done Final Fantasy 1 run, I think 2 years ago for AGDQ or SGDQ.
Yes, alongside Fiesel.
Yeah, and it was a lot of fun to watch. He even did fight, he did prep and fight Omega Weapon, or how is it called? The Warmech on the bridge. And it was really awesome to watch, and the run in general was super funny. There's a lot of fun during his stream. I think he'd really like to bring a really, like you said, chill atmosphere when he plays games. But that guy is crazy knowledgeable.
Yes.
And when he's on his streams, when somebody in streams asks a question, or when you feel that it's just a moment to talk about how the games work, you get really fast that this guy knows his game pretty well, and he's been playing it for years. But it doesn't remove anything from the fact that, man, does this guy knows his game.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's super fun to watch. I think we are a little bit alike on that thing, but knowing more about the intricacies, the under the hood thing in part of a game is so much fun. Yeah, I really like the fact that I'm doing a podcast especially for this. I want to know the runner. The human side of it is really interesting to me, but the interest of a game, like the knowledge, the upper level, the how everything works, is still what drew me in at the end of the day. I could have watched any type of content on Twitch, and I would have got entertainment from the runners themselves, but it's especially speedrunning I like because, like you said, there's a passion. I have a lot of friends which are casual gamers, and I have a lot of fun playing with them at any type of games, but when I start Twitch and I start a stream about a speedrunner, man, is it fun to see how these guys have put 10, 100 times more hour than I did into a game. That's super cool, and Gyre will give you that.
Yes, indeed, absolutely. I do agree.
Do you want to plug some stuff from yourself? Is there something coming up? Is there some content? I know you talked a little bit about it earlier, but let's say I'm a viewer and I don't know who Yagamoth is. There's not a lot of chance that happen, but maybe it will. They would end up on your Twitch. What would they look at? Why should they go and watch your stream?
So, upcoming, the probably bigger project will be Final Fantasy V Forge of Fiesta. As mentioned before, Final Fantasy V allows you to freely switch and choose for your 4 characters in your party any job that you have normally. The Forge of Fiesta restricts that to a specific party, and I know a lot about Final Fantasy V at this point just because I played it a lot, and the Forge of Fiesta itself is a lot of fun. I've even done other challenge runs of it, although that's not necessarily Forge of Fiesta related, but it's really interesting and fun to just kind of play that. It's basically a Forge of Fiesta season, as I call it, since it is also partially a charity event where basically if you don't like a certain character, you can pledge to donate $2 or $3 in order to change that.
I've seen that. That's awesome.
Yes. Essentially, the entire concept of Forge of Fiesta, it's a lot of fun, but on top of that, it's for charity, so it's an extra bonus.
That's cool. And can you plug what charity they're giving the money to?
I would need to look that up. Give me a second here.
No problem. Take your time.
So, by the way, the website for that is forgeoffiesta.com, just all in one word. And it's going to be from now, from when we are recording this podcast, in 9 days and 2 hours, 58 minutes and 1 second.
All right.
So, and let's see, can I find who this is for? I don't know which charity that was last time.
Like I said, I've watched tidbits of it. I think Brosensha was running a lot of it, and I was looking at a little bit of Brosensha at that time. But I don't remember a lot about it because I tend to have a Twitch open while I'm doing something else, and sometimes I do catch tidbits about a few runs, but sometimes I don't remember everything about it, sadly.
Alrighty. So the charity in question here is Child's Play.
All right.
I have to admit, I don't really know much about Child's Play charity, but from what I understand, it's up for children or kids in general that just don't really have access to any form of entertainment, that are just in rather dire situations, like they are bound to a hospital bed because they have certain sicknesses or illnesses and they don't really have anything else to do. And I do believe this is what the charity provides for them, just something that gives them a bit of more upbeat note on their days rather than just the constant thought of how their situation looks like.
All right. And if I want to be like a part of this, do I need to have a little bit of experience in Final Fantasy V? Do I need to have experience in Final Fantasy V speedrunning?
Absolutely not, actually. So,
Okay.
my very first playthrough of Final Fantasy V was through a Forge of Fiesta, where
Oh.
I saw people just kind of playing that with the Forge of Fiesta. I had no idea what it was beforehand, and it just kind of looked really interesting. So I decided to do a playthrough of it myself with those kinds of restrictions. So here's the thing. I'm the type of person who gets overwhelmed by the amount of choices. And specifically in Final Fantasy V, having to choose between one of 22 of the jobs and then just kind of mix and match them together, there's so much information, so much things, so many things that you would need to go through and that you could optimize. And essentially, I would get stuck in optimization loops where I feel like, okay, this is interesting and I want to try this and this and this and this and this, and I would never really go forward.
It would
The
take
Forge of
months or years.
Yes, pretty much. The Forge of Fiesta, on the other hand, just kind of gives me the opportunity to just restrict myself, or I get restricted to just those 4 jobs, and I will have to work it out with them. And that's really the charm of it. It takes a game which is surprisingly well balanced around any character you want to play as for running through the game. And as a first experience, I can highly recommend it if you are kind of in the similar shoes as I am, where you don't know much about the game or anything at all, and you might be easily overwhelmed by the amount of choices you can have through the job class system.
And so if they ever get frustrated with the choice the Ford Job Fiesta gave them, they can give away a little bit of money to change it. Is that it?
Yes, actually, they could do that.
Okay.
I mean, it's not really strictly regulated or anything like that.
Yeah.
You could just cheat if you really wanted to, but at the same time, it is for a good cause, but it's also a lot of fun to just stick to the rules.
So people could just go into the forjobfiesta.com, you said.
Yes.
And you said it was a season, so is there some kind of a mini tournament, leaderboards?
There can be tournaments and leaderboards. As in last year, there was the leaderboard for people that wanted to do a bit of a speedrun of the run, what is essentially the opening of the Portal Fiesta season.
Yeah.
But I actually have no real concept or clue why it is restricted, quote unquote, to just a month or two for Forza Fiesta, but it actually kind of makes it really appealing. It makes it a really focused effort for, well, just a lot of people like me or Almagus and probably a lot of other people just playing Final Fantasy V more or less around the same time. You watch each other play, you kind of gather experiences, you can introduce new players to certain aspects if they would like to have some help, or if they like exploring themselves, it's also a lot of fun to just see what they come up with.
And since it's all at the same times, I guess the community get like really buzzy, and you probably can find some type of a Discord or maybe a site somewhere or a forum where you can share and get information. So if somebody is new to the Forge Up Fiesta thing, he could get everything he needs at the same place, right?
Indeed. There is a Discord for the Forge Up Fiesta. It is linked on there as well.
Mm-hmm.
But for me personally, the main portion of it just kind of plays on Twitch itself. Like, if you just look at the Twitch directory, specifically for the game Final Fantasy V, you rarely see more than 1 or 2 people playing. But during Forge Up Fiesta, you will see like 5, 6, 7, 10, maybe even 20 sometimes of people just playing the game because it's Forge Up Fiesta season now. It's really nice.
Oh yeah, I can't wait. And you say it's in 9 days?
It's 9 days, yes, from now.
All right, I'll be looking that up too. That seems like a lot of fun.
I can highly recommend it.
All right. Thank you very much, Yagamoth, for the discussion part of the podcast. It was actually a lot of fun. I cannot tell you thank you enough. Like, you were the first person to tell me yes for the podcast, and that means something to me, and it always will. I'll remember that you will be the guy who gave me a chance, even though I was not known at the time. And that's really cool. Thank you.
Yes, I definitely like your approach to this on how, let's say, really passionate about this you are. So, well, I figured might as well give it a shot. Why not? And worst case scenario, it's a lot of fun to just talk to someone who is really passionate about games too. So thank you very much.
All right. We'll just drop this for a second. I will just set up everything for the teaching part tricks. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see each other's on episode 2. Or if you are on YouTube, you will see us on the next part, the skill teaching part of it. And I hope I won't be too bad. I hope Yagamoth will be forgiving for this.
It will be fine, no worries.